saying a lot more than that, and in fact the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, coming out a couple of days ago and saying that the death toll since protests began thought to be as high as 300. Clearly a lot of mixed pictures coming out of Egypt. Our correspondents, I can tell you, have seen at least 40 bodies, up to 80 bodies in the morgue. So these prayers dedicated to those who died in the protest. We're also expecting church services, a mass, Christian mass, to be held a little later on. And our correspondent telling us that these prayers are a show of solidarity, that people here will not be swayed, will not be divided, that all religions are standing shoulder to shoulder. Let's speak to an activist and blogger who's in the square now, Wael Khalil. Good to talk to you. We can see the pictures of what's happening in the square. Can you tell us why this is happening, what people are hoping to achieve through this?
I think that the revolution team, until now, we haven't achieved any significant. I mean, only the promises of the president and to add from the top.
I think we're going to have to leave that and come back to that, because clearly we're having problems hearing Wael Khalil. Perhaps we can redial him and get him back on the line. Now, thousands of people coming into the square for today. We had been talking earlier about whether the momentum of the protest maybe had been winding down. Banks and businesses are reopening for a short time as the government tries to get people back to normal. Army officials in the square yesterday asking people to get back to normal. Clearly, these calls not being heeded. And the big question now is, politically, what is going to happen? Groups are getting together under various coalitions, various umbrella groups, putting their demands to the government, the main one being, of course, that Hosni Mubarak steps down. The other big thing happening today is that senior members from the Muslim Brotherhood expected to hold talks with the Vice President, Omar Suleiman, today. That meeting hasn't started yet. We're also told that other political groups will be attending. The problem is, if Hosni Mubarak does step down, that leaves a constitutional vacuum, and that means changes can't be brought in, which would be necessary for free and fair elections. So the question is, what is going to happen and what should happen to Hosni Mubarak? Is there some plan that he can stay on as a figurehead, presidential powers passed to someone else? Or would that be acceptable to protesters? They want to see him go immediately. So prayers going on in Tahrir Square. Christian mass expected to follow a little later on today. As you can see, square packed full of people there, and we're told that the army keeping well out of the way here. Let's go back to Wael Khalil, who is in Tahrir Square. Apologies for earlier, while the phone line was very bad. Just tell us what people are doing now and what they're hoping to achieve. Okay, clearly having problems with Wael's phone there. I promise you we will try and get him back a little later on. Let's get a roundup of the day's events now. Alan Fisher reports.
Tighter security around Liberation Square. The Egyptian government is trying to get the country back to work. Banks and businesses are planning to reopen, but the protesters are still there. It's been announced the country's largest opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood, will meet the Vice President. This despite an earlier vow of no talks before President Mubarak's departure.
We gave the condition that aggression against our people stop. Tens of Egyptians were killed. We gave the condition that anybody who caused harm to the Egyptian people over the past 30 years will be taken to court. We gave the condition that peaceful demonstrations should be the right of all Egyptians. They accepted this.
The extent of the violence in other places in Egypt is now becoming clear. These pictures obtained by Al Jazeera show an attack by anti-government forces. The target, a police station, the location, Old Cairo on Friday. It's scenes like these which have prompted calls from Western leaders for immediate changes in the regime. But the under-pressure president received some unlikely support from a top American official. The man the US sent to Cairo to help solve the crisis said he wasn't sure Mubarak should go now.
President Mubarak's continued leadership is critical. It's his opportunity to write his own legacy. He's given 60 years of his life to the service of his country. This is an ideal moment for him to show the way forward.
The White House disowned the comments, saying they were private views. The Mubarak government is keen to show it's changing and it's business as usual. But the protesters still insist nothing changes until the country's leadership does. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
Live pictures from Tahrir Square, Liberation Square, where noon prayers have been going on. These prayers dedicated to the people who've died in the past 13 days of protests, which could be as many as 300. Let's go to Andrew Simmons, who joins us now from Cairo. Andrew, you're overlooking the Nile, and we were talking about government attempts to take the wind out of the sails of these protesters by getting them back to normal. But what are you seeing? Is that working at all?
Well, what you're seeing right now vividly is an image here of a sort of semblance of normality, and of course very, very solemn scenes in the square. And let's just take the camera again closer to. And yes, I can, yes. And just take the camera through there along the Qasr El Nil bridge. This has been the main entry point for the protest. You'll see the queues of cars there, and the crowds are still streaming in to Liberation Square. Many of them walking through. You'll see at the end of this shot a blue barricade which was put up by the protesters. They've been asked to take these down by the military. They refused to do so. And of course, they're still being checked. The people are still going in. This is all about resolution, resolve, and how they can maintain momentum. Now, elsewhere in the city, of course, the banks are reopening. We're talking here about $310 million lost from the economy each day of this protest demonstrations, and we're now in day 13, so it's not hard to work that out. And of course, the banks are only opening in a limited fashion, and they're opening not all over. Arabic banks are reopening in Cairo, some of them for limited hours in Cairo and Alexandria. So by no means back to normal. And the concern now is that with the banks reopening, there'll be a massive withdrawal of investment in Egypt by foreign investors, foreign currency coming out of the country. So this is a big test for the economy. And not only that, the lower middle classes now, we're hearing more and more, there's this no longer a battle on the streets, but a battle of hearts and minds. And people are now no longer thinking so much with passion, but they're thinking, some are thinking more practically about how they go about their daily lives. They think that some overtures have been made, some hope, especially with the Muslim Brotherhood joining the talks now, some developments within government. Hosni Mubarak is on his way out, and so some are thinking now, well, we can get to normal, we almost won. But of course, a very large volume of people are insisting they will stay, they will continue these demonstrations. They may just take the odd day off here and there, but they will continue this massive protest movement, which is slightly unwieldy at the top, of course. But the military are insistent that we will get back to normal, and people have to just take a look at the inside track, at what is happening to this country, at the chaos that's been referred to by so many people.
Yeah, we've also seen the state apparatus trying to undermine the protests in other ways. State television, for example, talking about what they call terrorist attacks against mosques and churches and Egyptian infrastructure, and saying that the Muslim Brotherhood have taken over the protests in Tahrir Square. I mean, when you've been out and about, Andrew, I mean, is there any credence to those kind of claims?
Well, I can only say that